Dr. Elira Voss had spent most of her adult life staring at stars, not through a telescope, but through lines of data, glowing grids, and shifting constellations on high-res screens. She worked at the Terran Stellar Cartography Bureau, a quiet government office tucked into the lower levels of a spaceport complex orbiting Mars. Her job was simple on paper: keep the official star maps accurate. But in practice it meant watching the slow, steady creep of human knowledge across the void, one light year at a time. One Tuesday, though Tuesday meant little out here, where days blurred into shifts, she was updating the public version of the Galactic Reference Atlas. It was routine work. Adjust for stellar drift, flag newly discovered exoplanets, smooth out minor discrepancies between civilian and military datasets. But as she scrolled toward the outer edge of known space, something caught her eye. Every single map, whether used by freighter pilots, school children, or deep-range explorers, ended at exactly the same spot, 12.7 light-years from Sol. Not 12.6, not 12.8, precisely 12.7. Beyond that, blank or worse, filled with generic labels like unsurveyed region or navigation not recommended. No coordinates. No sensor echoes. No even a dotted line suggesting here be dragons, just nothing. She leaned back in her chair, frowning. That wasn't how cartography worked. Even in the early days of ocean exploration, maps showed coastlines fading into uncertainty, not hard stops. Space was vast, yes, but humanity had sent probes far beyond that boundary decades ago. The Odyssey 9, the Voyager Theta, even the old UN deep-range drones, they'd all crossed that line. So why did every official chart act like the universe ended there? Curious, she pulled up the internal request portal and typed a simple query. Request raw telemetry logs from probes that crossed 12.7 Li threshold. Sol-centric frame. She hit send, expecting a short wait, maybe a few hours of processing. The reply came instantly. Access denied. Reason: administrative hold, level Sigma. She blinked. Level Sigma? That classification hadn't been used since the early 2300s, mostly for wartime comms or experimental AI containment. Why would old probe data be locked under that? She tried again, this time routing the request through academic channels citing historical research. Same result. Denied. She asked a colleague, a veteran cartographer who'd been mapping stars since the Titan colonies were just domes in the methane fog. He barely looked up from his screen. "Oh, that?" he said, voice flat. "Yeah, don't bother. It's just policy." "What policy?" she asked. He shrugged. "The map ends where it ends. Nothing out there worth mapping anyway," she pressed. "But the probes break. Sensors glitch. Data gets corrupted. Happens all the time past the edge." He finally met her eyes, and for a second she saw something flicker. Hesitation, maybe even warning. Then it vanished. "Save your energy, kid. Focus on the sectors we actually use." That night, alone in her quarters, she couldn't sleep. It wasn't just the denial that bothered her. It was the ease with which everyone accepted it. Like the edge of human space wasn't a frontier, but a finish line. And no one seemed to care why we stopped running. She started digging. Not through official channels, those were sealed tight, but through forgotten corners of the data web. Old mission logs buried in university archives. Retired navigation forums where ex-pilots swapped war stories over digital coffee. She found fragments, a mention of Odyssey 9 transmitting anomalous background resonance at 13.1 light-years. A footnote in a 2340 astrophysics paper noting unexpected signal echo patterns beyond the Sol boundary, later retracted without explanation. The more she looked, the clearer it became. Data had come back from beyond 12.7, but it had been quietly erased, redacted or filed away under codes no one could access. Not hidden like a secret vault, more like tossed into a drawer labeled "Don't look here," then left to gather dust while everyone pretended the drawer didn't exist. A week later, she tracked down a name, a former deep space comms officer who'd worked on the Voyager Theta mission. He'd retired decades ago and now lived in a low-grav habitat on the far side of Luna, growing algae and fixing antique radios. She sent him a message, just a simple question about signal logs from beyond the boundary. He replied the next day, voice crackling through a low-bandwidth channel. "You're asking about the edge," he said, not as a question. "Yes," she said. Why does the map stop there? A long pause. Then softly, we stopped listening. Not because we couldn't, but because we were told not to. By who? Doesn't matter. The order came down. All deep-range comms past 12.7 were to be flagged, reviewed, and archived permanently. He coughed. I used to think it was about security. Maybe aliens or some weird physics. But later I realized it wasn't about what was out there. It was about what hearing it would do to us. What do you mean? He didn't answer directly. Instead, he said, you ever notice how no one talks about it? Not in schools, not in the news, not even in sci-fi vids. It's like we all agreed without saying a word that some questions aren't worth asking. She sat in silence after the call ended. Outside her viewport, Mars hung in the black, red, and quiet. She thought about all the people who'd crossed that boundary in ships or dreams, and how none of them ever came back with stories worth telling. Or maybe they did and no one wanted to hear them. The next morning, she walked into her supervisor's office. I want to know why the map ends, she said plainly. Her supervisor, a woman with tired eyes and a medal from the Belt Wars, sighed. Elira, you're good at your job. Don't ruin it chasing ghosts. But it's not a ghost. It's data. It's history. History gets edited, the woman said gently. Sometimes for good reasons. Sometimes just because it's easier. That night, Elira made a decision. She wouldn't stop asking. Not because she expected to find aliens or wormholes or ancient ruins, but because the silence itself felt wrong. Like a wound no one would let heal because they'd grown used to the pain. She began compiling everything she'd found, logs, redactions, interview snippets, into a private archive. She encrypted it, backed it up across 3 off-grid servers, and set a dead man switch. If she disappeared or went silent for more than 72 hours, it would auto-release to every independent newsfeed, academic network, and public data hub she could reach. She didn't do it for fame. She did it because someone had to remember that maps aren't just about where we've been. They're about where we're willing to look next. And right now, humanity had drawn a line in the stars and said, this far, and no farther, but no one could tell her why. And that, more than anything, felt like the real mystery. After that first strange discovery, the silence around the edge of human space started to feel less like a gap in knowledge and more like something deliberate, like a door that had been quietly locked from the inside. But instead of walking away, the cartographer kept pushing. She knew she couldn't go through official channels anymore. Those doors were welded shut. So she turned to the places people forget. Dusty corners of the data archives, old mission logs buried under layers of bureaucratic noise, and retired engineers who still remembered how things used to work before everything got streamlined. She spent nights hunched over her screen, sifting through decades of spaceflight records. Most of it was routine. Fuel logs, maintenance reports, crew meal plans. But every now and then she'd find something odd. A probe that went silent just after crossing the 12.7 light-year mark. A sensor reading labeled corrupted, even though the transmission quality was perfect. One log from a deep-range scout ship noted, unusual echo pattern in background radiation, repeating every 47.3 hours. The next entry? Blank, then, all systems nominal. Proceeding to next waypoint. It was like someone had taken a red pen and carefully erased anything that didn't fit the story. Nothing out there. Move along. She dug deeper. She found a retired navigation officer living in a small habitat near the asteroid belt. He'd flown supply runs past the edge in the early days, back when the boundary wasn't so strictly enforced. When she messaged him, he didn't reply right away. But 3 days later, a short audio file arrived. His voice was rough, like he hadn't spoken in a while. I remember the day we crossed it, he said. Not because of anything we saw, but because of what we didn't hear. Out past 12.7, the static changed. It wasn't empty. It felt watched, not by eyes, but by silence itself. Like the universe was holding its breath, he paused. We sent a report. Next week, Command told us to stop filing long-range sensor logs, said it was redundant. After that, nobody talked about it, not even in the mess hall. She asked if he still had any raw data. He laughed, a dry, tired sound. They wiped the ship's core before we docked. Said it was standard decon, but I kept a personal backup. On an old chip. Buried it in my toolbox. He sent her coordinates to a storage locker in Ceres Station. Take it, maybe you'll see something we were too scared to understand. She went. The chip was small, no bigger than a fingernail. When she plugged it in, it contained only one file. 17 seconds of unprocessed deep space audio from beyond the boundary. Not music, not voices. Just a low hum, steady and calm with a rhythm that felt almost familiar, like a heartbeat slowed down to cosmic speed. She played it over and over. It didn't scare her. It made her feel small, but not alone. She tried to cross-reference it with known cosmic phenomena. Pulsars? No. Solar winds? No. Background radiation? Close, but not quite. This had structure, intention, or maybe just the illusion of it, born from a human mind desperate to find meaning in the void. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was real. And if it was, why had everyone pretended it wasn't? She reached out to a small group of independent researchers, people who worked outside the big agencies, publishing papers on fringe astrophysics or ancient navigation myths. At first, they were skeptical. But when she shared the audio clip and the redacted logs, their tone changed. One whispered, "I've seen this before," in a declassified military archive. They called it the Echo Zone, but the file vanished a week later. Another added, "My grandfather flew deep range in the 2300s. He used to say, 'The stars stopped talking past the line.' I thought he was just tired. Now I wonder." For the first time, she didn't feel crazy. She felt part of something, quiet, scattered, but real. A thread of curiosity that hadn't been fully snuffed out. But the more she shared, the more she noticed little things. Her secure comms started glitching. Her access to certain databases timed out randomly. Once she found her personal logs had been accessed from an unknown terminal, though nothing was taken. Just looked at, like someone was watching to see how far she'd go. She didn't stop. Instead, she got smarter. She used burner accounts, met contacts in person, in crowded transit hubs where surveillance was thin. She learned to speak in code. "I'm updating old charts" meant "I'm chasing the edge." "Need calibration data" meant "send me anything from beyond 12.7. One evening, while reviewing a declassified maintenance report from a long-retired deep space relay station, she found a footnote that made her freeze. It listed a routine firmware update, dated just 3 days after the Odyssey 9 transmitted its final signal from 13.2 light-years out. The update's purpose? Signal filtering optimization. But in the technical notes, buried in jargon, was a line that read, "Suppress non-standard resonance patterns originating beyond Sol 12.7 threshold." They hadn't just stopped listening. They'd built walls in the code itself. Walls that filtered out anything that didn't sound normal. That night she sat in her quarters staring at the stars through the viewport. She thought about all the people who'd flown out there. Scientists, pilots, dreamers, and how their discoveries had been quietly erased. Not because they were dangerous, but because they were inconvenient. Because admitting there was something beyond the edge would mean admitting we don't have all the answers. And maybe, just maybe, that we never will. But here's the thing about silence. It only works if everyone agrees to keep quiet. She wasn't going to agree. She started compiling everything. Audio clips, redacted logs, interview notes, firmware records into a single encrypted package. She didn't plan to leak it yet, not until she understood more. But she needed to protect it. So she split the key across 3 trusted contacts, none of whom knew the others. If something happened to her, the truth would still get out. She also began planning something bolder. If no one would send a probe past the boundary, maybe she could find a way to go herself. Not as a government mission, not with official approval. Just a small ship, a clean ID, and a one-way ticket to the edge of the map. Because the real mystery wasn't what was out there. It was why we stopped looking. And that question, simple, human, and stubborn, was the one no policy could erase. When the cartographer finally stood before the Interstellar Science Consortium, she thought she was ready. She'd spent weeks organizing her findings. Audio clips, redacted logs, firmware notes, even that strange 17-second hum from beyond the edge. She believed that if she just showed them the evidence clearly, calmly, they'd have to listen. After all, these were scientists. People who built their lives on questions, not silence. But the room felt wrong from the start. It wasn't hostile. That would have been easier. No, it was worse, polite. Dismissive in the gentlest way possible, like she was a child who'd brought a drawing to a boardroom meeting. They let her speak. They nodded. One even smiled. But their eyes never really focused on her. They looked past her, through her as if she were already part of the background noise. When she finished, there was a pause. Then a senior astrophysicist cleared his throat. "Fascinating work," he said. "But you must understand, resources are limited. We prioritize regions with active colonies, trade routes, habitable zones. What's beyond 12.7 light years? Empty space. No stars worth noting. No resources. Sending probes there is like sailing into a desert with no water, just to prove the sand exists." She opened her mouth to argue, but another voice cut in, calmer, smoother. "Besides," said a woman in a navy blue uniform, clearly military liaison, "certain boundaries exist for civilizational stability. Not every mystery needs solving. Some things are left alone, for everyone's peace of mind." That phrase stuck with her. For everyone's peace of mind. It sounded noble, but it felt like a wall. A soft padded wall, but a wall all the same. After the meeting, no one approached her. No one asked for copies of her data. No one whispered, "Meet me later, I want to help." They just filed out, chatting about lunch or upcoming conferences, as if she'd presented a weather report, not a crack in the foundation of human knowledge. Back in her quarters, she replayed the meeting in her head. She realized something chilling. They weren't hiding the truth. They genuinely didn't care. The mystery wasn't suppressed, it was ignored. And indifference, she understood now, was far harder to fight than secrecy. You can expose a secret, but how do you wake someone who's chosen to sleep? She started watching people. Not spies or officials, just ordinary folks. Pilots at spaceports, students in orbital academies, kids playing with holographic star maps in public parks. She noticed something strange. No one pointed to the edge of the map and asked, "What's out there?" Not even in stories. Not in songs. Not in dreams. In school books, the boundary was drawn like a coastline. Natural, expected. In navigation sims, ships would simply refuse to plot courses beyond it, with a soft chime and the message, "Route not recommended." No explanation. No drama. Just a quiet nudge back toward the known. It was as if, over generations, humanity had trained itself to stop wondering, not through laws or threats, but through habit, through comfort, through the slow erosion of curiosity replaced by routine. The map ended not because we hit a wall, but because we got tired of walking. She remembered an old Earth saying, "The most dangerous prison is the one you don't know you're in." One evening, she visited a public observatory on Luna. It was packed with families, tourists, school groups. A guide pointed to a glowing projection of the galaxy. "And here," he said cheerfully, "is the full extent of human space. Everything we've explored, settled, and mapped. Beyond this, well, probably just more of the same." A little girl raised her hand. "But what if there's something different out there?" The guide chuckled. "If there was, we'd know. Our best ships, our smartest minds, they've looked. Nothing to see." The girl nodded, satisfied. And that broke something inside the cartographer. Not anger, not sadness, just a deep, quiet grief for the question that was asked and the answer that shut it down before it could grow. She began to understand the real pattern. It wasn't about aliens or hidden dangers. It was about control, not of space, but of imagination. If people believe the map is complete, they stop asking for new maps. If they think the story is finished, they stop writing new chapters. And a species that stops wondering stops growing. She tried one last thing. She uploaded a simplified version of her findings to an open academic forum. No classified data, just public records and logical questions. Within hours, the post was flagged. Not deleted, just buried under community guidelines about unverified speculation. Comments were disabled. A moderator sent a polite note. "Please focus on peer-reviewed topics." But in the brief window it was up, a few people saw it. One message came through an encrypted channel. "I've seen the same gaps. Meet me at Dock 7 Ganymede Transit tomorrow. Come alone." She went. The contact was an old data archivist, eyes sharp behind thick glasses. "They don't hide it because it's dangerous," the archivist said quietly, handing her a small drive. "They hide it because it's ordinary, and that's scarier." "What do you mean?" "If we found gods or monsters out there, we'd worship or fight them. But what if it's just more silence? More emptiness? Or worse, what if it echoes us back? Our signals, our noise, our loneliness, bouncing back after centuries, that's not a threat to security. It's a threat to hope, and hope is harder to rebuild than a shield. The cartographer took the drive. It contained sensor logs from a civilian freighter that drifted past the boundary during a navigation error. For 6 hours it recorded nothing unusual, until its comms picked up a faint repeating pattern. Not alien, not natural. It was a distorted echo of an old Earth radio broadcast from the 21st century. Music, static, a voice saying good night, sent out centuries ago, now returning from the dark like a ghost. The freighter's captain reported it. The log was archived. The ship was quietly retired. The crew reassigned. No investigation, no follow-up, just silence. That night, the cartographer made a decision. She wouldn't wait for permission. She wouldn't beg for attention. If no one would look beyond the edge, she would go herself. Not to find answers, but to prove that the question still matters. Because in the end, the map doesn't end at 12.7 light-years. It ends where curiosity stops, and she refused to let hers die. The old cargo hauler wasn't meant for deep-range travel. It was a workhorse, built to shuttle supplies between Mars and the outer asteroid belts, not to sail into the quiet dark beyond human space. But that was exactly why it was perfect. No one would notice it missing. No one would track it. And if it vanished past the 12.7 light-year line, well, that was probably expected. She'd spent months preparing in secret. Trading favors for spare parts. Rewiring old navigation systems to bypass the built-in boundary locks. Loading the hold with extra oxygen recyclers, nutrient paste, and a single backup comms array she'd rebuilt from scrap. She didn't bring weapons. She didn't bring fear. Just a recorder, a few personal logs, and the stubborn belief that some questions deserve to be asked, even if no one's listening. The launch was quiet. No fanfare, no countdown, just a slow drift away from the orbital dock, engines humming softly as she pointed the nose toward the edge of the map. As the familiar glow of human space faded behind her, stations, satellites, the distant sparkle of colony lights, she felt not loneliness, but clarity. For the first time in years, she was doing something real. Days passed, then weeks. The ship sailed through empty starfields, past silent comets and dead asteroids that had never seen a human shadow. Everything felt normal. Too normal. No strange distortions. No alien signals. No cosmic walls. Just the endless, gentle black. She crossed the 12.7 light-year mark without ceremony. No alarm sounded. No flash of light. Just a soft chime from the nav system. Boundary exceeded. Navigation override active. She smiled. Even the machine knew it was breaking a rule. For 2 more days, nothing changed. She began to wonder if she'd been wrong. Maybe there really was nothing out here. Maybe the silence was just silence. Then, on the 3rd night, ship time, her long-range comms array picked up a signal. Not a voice, not a message, just a pulse, steady, rhythmic like a heartbeat stretched across light years. She ran diagnostics. The array was clean. No interference, no glitch. The signal was real. She recorded it. Played it back. It wasn't random noise. It had structure. A repeating pattern buried in the cosmic background radiation, almost like an echo. But echoes need a source. And out here there was nothing to echo off of. Then it hit her. She cross-referenced the pattern with old Earth broadcast archives. Buried deep in the data, she found a match. A fragment of a public radio transmission from over 300 years ago. A late-night show, a song, a voice saying, "Hope you're listening out there, wherever you are." The signal wasn't coming from out here. It was coming from back there, from Earth, from humanity itself, but warped, delayed, and returned after centuries of travel through the void. As if the universe had caught our noise, held onto it, and sent it back to us, softened by time and distance. She sat in the cockpit, staring at the readout, tears welling up, not from fear, but from a strange kind of recognition. It was like hearing your own voice in an old recording you'd forgotten you made. Haunting, familiar, sad. She transmitted everything back toward Sol, the signal, her logs, her location. She didn't encrypt it. She didn't hide it. She sent it openly on civilian bands, hoping someone, anyone, would hear it and understand. Then she waited. Hours passed. No reply, no acknowledgement, not even an automated ping. She checked her outbound logs. The transmission had been received by relay stations near the boundary. But beyond that? Silence. She tried again. Same result. It was as if her message had been swallowed the moment it touched human space. Not blocked. Not jammed. Just ignored. Like dropping a stone into a well that no one believes exists. That's when she truly understood. It wasn't that there was nothing beyond the edge. It was that what came back from beyond. The echoes of our own voices. Our loneliness, our unanswered calls was too painful to face. So instead of listening, we pretended the well was dry. We drew a line on the map and said, "This is all there is." Not because we knew it was true, but because it was easier than admitting how small, how quiet, how alone we really are. She powered down non-essential systems to save energy. The ship floated in the dark, a tiny speck of warmth in an ocean of cold. She looked out the viewport. No Earth, no sun, just stars. Distant, indifferent, beautiful, she recorded one last log. "I'm not lost," she said softly, voice steady. "I'm just outside the story. But stories can change. Maps can grow. All it takes is one person willing to sail past the edge and say, 'I'm still here. Are you listening?'" She didn't know if anyone would ever hear it. But she said it anyway, because the truth wasn't in the signal. It wasn't in the data. It was in the act of sending it. In the refusal to let silence win. As the ship drifted deeper into the unknown, she felt no regret. Only peace. She had gone where no one asked to go. She had listened where no one wanted to hear. And in doing so, she had reclaimed something humanity had quietly surrendered, the right to wonder. Back in human space, her transmission sat in a server queue, flagged for review. A junior technician saw it, hesitated, then moved it to a low-priority folder labeled Anomalous Echo, likely noise. It would sit there, unread for years, but somewhere in the dark between stars, a voice had spoken, and the universe in its quiet way had answered. When the cartographer returned to human space, no one greeted her. No debriefing team, no news crews, not even a custom scan. Her ship drifted into a quiet maintenance dock on the far side of Ceres, where old haulers went to be stripped for parts or forgotten. She powered down the engines, stepped out into the low-gravity bay and took a long breath of recycled air that tasted like metal and dust. She was home, but it didn't feel like it anymore. Officially, nothing happened. Her unauthorized journey was logged as a navigation calibration error. She was quietly reassigned to a data entry role in the deep archives, stacks of obsolete star charts, outdated sensor logs, and decommissioned mission records. A desk job buried so deep in the system that even the cleaning bots rarely visited. It was punishment wrapped in paperwork, not harsh, just invisible. The kind of silence that says, "We saw what you did. We won't stop you. We'll just make sure no one ever hears about it." But she didn't care. She'd seen what she needed to see, heard what she needed to hear, and she knew something now that no policy could erase. The edge of the map wasn't a wall. It was a choice. And humanity had chosen over and over to stop asking why. Still, she kept working. Not for recognition, but for memory. In the quiet hours between filing obsolete logs, she copied fragments of her findings, cleaned of anything that could get her arrested, and slipped them into public academic threads, open-source science forums, even children's educational databases disguised as historical navigation curiosities. She didn't shout. She planted seeds, and slowly, quietly, some of them grew. A student on Europa, working on a thesis about signal decay in deep space, stumbled on one of those fragments. It mentioned the echo pattern, the one that sounded like an old Earth broadcast. Curious, they dug deeper, found more, shared it with a study group. One of them posted a short video explaining the anomaly in simple terms. What if our signals come back to us? Centuries later? The video got a few thousand views, then 10,000. Then it was picked up by a small science podcast. No one called it a conspiracy. No one claimed aliens. They just asked a question. Why does the map end at 12.7 light years? That question, small and human, began to spread, not through outrage but through wonder. Teachers started using it in classrooms. Imagine you sent a message into space. What if it came back? Changed? Artists made soundscapes from the echo pattern. Musicians wove it into songs. A novelist wrote a quiet story about a woman who sailed past the edge just to hear the stars breathe. The institutions didn't fight it. They didn't need to. They just ignored it. Official maps still ended at the same line. Navigation systems still refused to plot courses beyond it. But in the spaces between, the cafes, the dorm rooms, the late-night chats on orbital shuttles, people started talking again. Not about threats or secrets, but about curiosity. About what it means to be small in a vast universe and still dare to listen. The cartographer watched it all from her quiet desk. She never took credit. She didn't need to. The idea was free now. And once an idea is free, it can't be locked away again. Years passed. New ships launched. New colonies formed. But something had shifted. Young pilots began requesting extended calibration runs just past the boundary, technically allowed, as long as they didn't transmit anything unverified. Some returned with strange sensor logs. Others came back saying, "It's quiet out there." But not empty. No one punished them. No one praised them. But no one told them to stop either. Then one day, a civilian science vessel, funded by a group of universities and private donors, announced a mission: Project Echo Horizon. Its goal wasn't to find aliens or new worlds, just to listen, to record what comes back from beyond the edge, to treat the void not as a dead zone but as a mirror. The cartographer read the announcement on a public feed. She didn't smile. She didn't cry. She just closed the window, stood up, and walked to the archive window. Outside, a cargo shuttle lifted off, its engines glowing against the dark. She watched it until it vanished into the stars. She knew the truth now. The reason no one inquired why the map ended wasn't because they didn't know. It was because the answer was too human to bear. Out there in the silent dark, the universe doesn't shout. It whispers back the echoes of our own voices, our hopes, our fears, our loneliness after centuries of travel. And facing that reflection means admitting we're not the center of the story, that we're just one voice in a vast, quiet choir. Most people couldn't live with that, so they drew a line and called it the end. But not everyone. Some still sail past it. Not for glory, not for answers. But because the act of asking, of reaching into the unknown and saying, "Is anyone there?" is what makes us human. The map still ends at human space. Officially, anyway. But unofficially, in the hearts of those who still wonder, it keeps growing. One quiet question at a time, and that's enough, because in the end, the stars don't care about borders. They only care if someone is still looking up.